what is your vision for the region, and what type of investment do you want to see? Go ahead, Matt. You start.
The business community understands that it is not an either-or answer. The St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce is invested in the transit solution for the Twin Cities because without transit, business comes to a halt. Transit isn't just trains, it isn't just buses, it isn't just highways, it isn't just all of the above, it is everything. Because if you run into a situation where we begin getting this argument of we can't afford transit, we can only afford highways, what we're doing is we're condemning ourselves in the business community to saying, well, then we need to build parking garages. And if we need to build parking garages, we're not going to invest in core downtowns because the real estate is too expensive. And you can fast forward all these things, and without a multimodal system and without the commitment of the Metropolitan Council to invest in multimodal, we actually end up strangling the core inner cities, and we simply can't afford that.
Thanks. Thanks, Matt. How about you, Commissioner?
Well, my vision is to be what I think this region has always been, which is a region of opportunity. And that means you say to someone, you want a good job? Come to the Twin Cities. You want a good education? Come to the Twin Cities. You want a high quality of life? Come to the Twin Cities. And in all of those, there's an element of getting around. I mean, how do we get people to their jobs? Roads, buses, light rail. We need to have all sorts of options. How do we get them to school? When we were talking about the route selection for Southwest, we heard from people who want to have options to get to school. They want to have public transit options. Quality of life, you need to have a system that serves everybody, especially as you look at the changes that you talked about. And in Hennepin County, we know that in the past 10 years, our level of poverty has almost doubled. And we know that our senior population is going to go up, and we know that our transit-dependent population is going to go up. So these investments are, in my mind, key to the future of this region.
Go ahead, Bruce. How about you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and congratulate the members of the council and your staff and all the great community partners, including counties and cities and the business community. I see some colleagues here as well. You know, it's interesting, you used the term 21st century transportation transit system, and I'll kick that up one notch. I'll say world class, because the reality is if we want world-class businesses and a world-class community, we really do need to have a world-class transportation system. And part of that world-class transportation system really has to be a world-class transit system. So no matter what you think, what your mode is that you like or dislike, the reality is that a region like this, to be competitive across this great country, where we need to be competitive, we have to have a world-class system. And if you buy into the greater MSP's goal of attracting 100,000 jobs over the next 5 years, which is a fantastic goal, we at the Twin West Chamber buy into that, you need to have all the facets in place, and one of those facets is transit and light rail.
That's great. Thanks, Bruce. Can you give us an example of a particular business, one or two businesses that you've worked with in the Twin West, and you know how they're thinking about this and why it's important to a specific business?
Sure. When it comes specific to Southwest, and again, I guess what I didn't say is we know that a regional system is important. You can't just have a fragmented system. If you look at the math of these transit systems across North America, they're very comprehensive systems that encourage growth and development, serve the whole region. So you mentioned United Health earlier. If you look at the corridor and even draw a very close line around the corridor, there's over 50 companies that are over 100 employees along Southwest alone. Some of those are great companies like United Health and Cigna and Cargill, a lot of names you recognize. One of those companies that we know is real supportive of, we've been meeting with legislators, is SuperValu. SuperValu believes in a strong system, and if you want to talk to a company, most of us think of SuperValu as Cub Foods, but they're probably just as good at being a logistics company, and they know how we get people and things around the metropolitan area and across this country is important. So you look at companies like SuperValu that really understand how these systems all interrelate, and you find great support for projects like the Southwest Light Rail.
And Commissioner, what are you hearing from the communities that you represent along that Southwest corridor?
Well, Commissioner Dorfman, I think, is here, someplace out there. She would tell the story that when we started Southwest 10 years ago, I mean, it's been a 10-year odyssey of getting to this point. Peter McLaughlin is here, and he's been instrumental. People were skeptical of Southwest. They were skeptical of the corridor. They were skeptical of the whole idea of light rail. Very, maybe not hostile, but they didn't really see the possibilities. Now, if you talk to people in the Southwest corridor, the answer is not, you know, should we do this? It's 2018. I mean, is that how quickly you can get it to us? You can't get it to us before that. And that's because people now have seen, they've seen the Hiawatha corridor. They've seen the potential not just in Minneapolis but in Bloomington, and they've had the opportunity to understand what it means for this region. And I think we will change our sense of this region when you can get on a light rail vehicle in Eden Prairie and find yourself at the state capitol. You can find yourself at Union Depot. You can find yourself at the University of Minnesota. You know how long it's going to take. You know how you're going to get there. You know how much it's going to cost. And that will mean a whole different mindset for how we think about where we're going to work, how we think about where we're going to go to entertain ourselves, how we're going to visit family members, how we're going to connect with each other. And I think people in my area are excited, I mean, truly excited about the possibility of being in the forefront of that 21st century or 22nd century transportation system.
Matt, you know, you've been involved in working with us on construction during Central Corridor Light Rail. And tell us, you know, what have we learned and how can we apply these lessons as we're thinking about developing Southwest Light Rail?
Well, Central Corridor has had its challenges, and it's fair to say that dust as a food condiment doesn't add a lot to a number of the... On the plus side, though, there isn't a business that we deal with that doesn't understand that investments are either or and alternatives. And if we're going to make this investment, as painful as it is, we have to make the investment for the future benefit. Many of you may have participated on Christmas Day. I know the Audubon Society always does a bird count where you look out your window or you add up the birds that you see, you send in the results. I've told any number of people that there's a new species of bird on University Avenue. In fact, the Met Council tallied them up. And if you look out and you see men and women invariably in khaki pants and blue shirts and blazers, and they're real estate developers. And they are looking at the private investment that is flowing into University Avenue now as a result of the public investment that we're putting in infrastructure. And that's the economic multiplier that makes sense to the business community. And that's the best part of what Central Corridor is bringing to St. Paul.
How do housing and transit relate to each other from your perspective?
When I started working in city government Minnetonka, I suppose more than 15 years ago now, we realized that Minnetonka, if it was going to continue to attract young families, it needed to have diverse housing. And that was something that we had historically had. I mean, Minnetonka, despite what you might think, it is a very diverse community in a sense of housing, but housing values increased dramatically. And that began to change the community. And so we looked at different ways to try and make sure that everybody could afford to live in Minnetonka who wanted to do that. And what I see today is some of the fruits of those efforts, but I also look at a community where that actually has lost population. So in the 2010 census, Minnetonka, which used to be about 50,000, is now I think around 48,000. And I think that's a lot of people like me, whose children now are grown, but we're still at home, and we're beginning to think about what the alternative is for us to move to that next housing option. And knowing that when I leave, I'm hoping a young family is going to move into my house and enjoy my house and my neighborhood as much as I did. So having a variety of housing styles and options attracts a variety of people, and it helps our communities invigorate themselves and reinvigorate themselves, and I think it's absolutely crucial to where we want to be in the future.
Great, thank you. And Bruce, talk with us a little bit about planning decisions at the local level, as well as at the regional level, and how they affect decisions about where businesses locate, and how they impact development around transit stop areas.
Sure, there's sort of an obvious answer to that question when you look at the pure element. You look at Southwest in particular, 15 miles, 17 stations. You know, we know that those 17 stations will, back to Matt's comment, will really spur some great economic development in the area, and it will largely be private sector economic development, new money that flows, new investment into the area. So that makes a big difference from that perspective when you look at how you kind of revitalize a local community. And for those of you familiar with the project, there's a great segment called Community Works that makes sure we will, community by community, station by station, figure out what makes sense in those areas and kind of guide the development, or at least propose the types of development in those areas. So we know that makes a big difference. But also relative to companies, the commissioner just said it, the workforce is different today than it was back in 1970. And those that have heard kind of the Bush Foundation speech on productivity, you know we need to access the right talent at the right time. And what we're excited about is the fact that an Eden Prairie company could have access to East Metro workforce. And that's very important. To be able to get people around and move the workforce to the right place. You go back to super value again. You know, as corporations continue to adjust their business models, and quite a few of them look at some of the potential growth, they know that they need to be able to get employees from around the metropolitan area. And quite frankly, not all those employees are the $200,000 employees. You need to be able to really access a diverse workforce from across the metropolitan area. And this is a great opportunity to do that.
Any advice for us or the crowd out here who are our partners in this work? Matt, do you want to say anything?
It's absolutely critical that we continue, excuse me, and Susan, you mentioned this early on. This is not city versus city. Transit is a regional asset. And it's absolutely critical that as we look at future transit investments, they be balanced east and west, understanding that if we only look at one side of town versus the other, again, we're disproportionately kind of predicting the future for how this community will develop. So on the east side, the St. Paul Area Chamber is committed to working with Ramsey County and the Met Council to look at where are the next logical add-ons on the east side that are going to continue to bring, as Bruce said, the labor shed into play, where a resident in White Bear Lake or in Afton or in Woodbury is able to get on a train and potentially end up at Super Value. If that's where he or she wants to work, they now have a way to get there without being in a car.
That's great. Commissioner, how about you?
Well, I'll speak for Hennepin County and say that we are thrilled to have the partnership with the Metropolitan Council. It was great news to have $25 million in the bonding bill for Southwest. That's not to say that our work is not done, but we clearly can see that goal. And to have you with us and to have the support of the region, and it's been a regional initiative, has really made all the difference to us. And I am grateful to have you all here today and to have your work with us going forward.
And Bruce, how about you?
Well, just one final comment, and again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. When you look at transit systems, and no matter how you feel about them in transit and transportation, I think we're going to miss a big opportunity if we don't not only plan as a region, which is very important, but also look at the individual projects as they flow. Twin West was very supportive of Central Corridor. We knew that was a critical path between St. Paul and Minneapolis. And I think you have to look at these transit systems each in somewhat as a part of a system, but then also individually and say, you know what, this is what makes sense for the region. Here's what helps us get done what we want to get done as a region. And I again want to thank the Metropolitan Council for its role in that process.